Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And today we are looking at quite an interesting story to come out of Mexico, where the skeleton of a Spanish monk in the palace of Cortés turned out to actually be an Aztec woman. Huh?
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty funny. The skeleton in question has been displayed at the palace for 50 years, under the belief that it was one of the monks that was a part of the local mission. And yeah, it seems that just about every piece of demographic information they had about this skeleton was wrong. They went to reanalyze it fairly recently, I believe.
Uh, yeah, so what ended
Uh,
up happening was in 2017, Puebla got hit by a really bad earthquake, which prompted a renovation project to try and restore and save the structure from damages that happened. And this actually led to a re examination of this burial, which had originally been excavated in 1971. And it was thought to be that of Leyva, who was a
yeah,
Spanish monk that served Juana de Zuniga y Arellano, the wife of Hernan Cortés. And this
yeah,
was entirely based on a codex from the 16th century that described Levia's burial near the old house's gate.
yeah.
However, when it came to everything else, it led to some doubts.
Yeah, the identification of the skeleton as that of the Spanish monk was based solely on historiographic data. It was based only on the reports that the Spanish had written down that they had buried the man here. Uh, However, the skeleton was one buried in the fetal position, which is not something Spanish typically did. Number two, there were some cranial modifications to the bones, which were not typical of Spanish men, but are in fact typical of a tribe of Aztec women who were in the area.
They would grow their skulls and use skull shaping and forming. But
Yeah,
it also led to this because of the codex that stated the location of Juan's burial. There was a plaque that was read over. So this burial was excavated but left in situ, and they placed glass over it so you could view it from above. And
yeah,
it had a plaque that had a description that said, "Burial found in situ of a man with deformed vertebrae." And traditionally, it is stated that this may be the monk Juan Livia, who served the wife of Cortez. However, due to the type of posture, it might be indigenous.
yeah, yeah. And following the damage of the earthquake, when they were, fixing everything and reassessing everything, they decided to take an actual look at the skeleton. And researchers have now confirmed that the skeleton is in fact a female of approximately 30 to 40 years old, who most likely died at about the in the early 16th century, so the early 1500s, which does correspond to the Spanish invasion of
Yeah.
the Aztec territory. Given her posture and a couple of the other details in the burial, it seems that she may have been, they theorize that she may have been buried ritualistically, probably as a sort of human sacrifice so that the gods would please stop sending Hernan Cortez into Aztec territory.
God, Cortez was a bastard. When you talk
Yeah.
about the atrocities that took place during the colonial period, Hernan Cortez is literally like the worst of the worst. He makes every Bond villain, every superhero villain look like a cookie cutter like
Yeah.
vigilante.
Yeah, if there were to be a top 10 like worst human beings in history, Hernan Cortez is either on that list or gets an honorable mention.
I think he's probably closer to the high end of that list because even amongst some of the all-time greats of the evils, he still, I think, has the highest body count because his form of diplomacy throughout Central and South America was hack and slash.
Yeah.
It wasn't diplomatic. It was, you shall
Yeah.
die. And that's actually where this palace comes from. Because it's on the remains of the indigenous city that was there previously.
Yep. 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 The Palace of Cortés was built on the ruins of the Aztec city Cuan Ahuac. That's about as close as I can get to it. Um,
Kuahua, not
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So, and that was something that the Spanish did a lot in their colonial holdings too, was instead of quote unquote reinventing the wheel, they would just take the now liberated
vacant.
liberated cities and they would build their own things on top of it, including temples and religious buildings. They quite legitimately put Catholic churches on the crest of because people were already going there to make their ceremonies and to do their thing. But yeah, it's also really interesting too because also associated with this burial, not that far off, is a woman and an infant,
Yeah,
which they suggest may have some familial relations, and they suggest potentially doing additional DNA studies to make that firm connection.
yeah, yeah. Basically, the original archaeological work around the skeletons was minimal, and now that the natural disaster has passed through the area, people are actually taking the time to reassess what is in a museum and come to a better understanding of it. And that's one of the fun, interesting points of this article, too, is the fact that museums can get things wrong. Museums don't always have the best understanding of what they have. This one clearly didn't. It thought a 30-year-old Aztec woman was a Spanish monk.
Well, and I wouldn't just say museums. This goes for a lot of academia, not to sow any doubts in our profession or our field,
No.
but there are things where we don't get things right, and it's part of the understanding of archaeologists and those who study this kind of thing to know that we may not have the right answer, but to be open to additional interpretations and to additional research later down the line. But this does highlight something that a lot of people get wrong in a lot of ways is even if there are gendered things with skeletons and with human remains traditionally, whether biologically or however you want to phrase the argument, things that are quote unquote biologically male or biologically female, when it comes to corpses and when it comes to skeletons, there are some differentiators, but it's not always a guarantee. There's a lot of amorphous deformities that can happen to the bodies that would leave them unable to be gendered properly, or it could just be incomplete. It could have decomposed to a point where we cannot make those identifiable factors. Like a lot of people make the argument that, oh, when you're dead and gone, what gender are you going to be?
Yeah,
And
and
the,
yeah, and to that point, there was something else. I read as a different article as we spiral off topic here, where there was a graveyard in Europe, I believe, where they found 80 bodies. They could accurately identify the gender of I think 3 to 5.
yeah.
And it's like, hmm. But yeah, the yeah, like the purpose here is just museums should always be reassessing and always be looking into why they think they know what they know and what new ways they could have to confirm or deny that. Like 1971, DNA testing for bones, not really a thing. It's not viable to just go and do that. Nowadays, in the 2020s, yeah, that is something we can just do.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
new information, new methods of information are coming out. But this is also just fun because it's like you managed to get everything wrong for 50 years, and we love you for it.
there's one last point I want to make that is kind of important too that we entirely glossed over in this point
Oh yeah,
is
yep.
a lot of times too if we need to be cognizant because these are indigenous remains, they are not European by any stretch of the imagination. We need to be cognizant of the descendant communities, the local peoples who are descendants of this group, because a lot of times indigenous communities don't want that research done. They don't want the DNA analysis and analyzed because it is a destructive process. You have to damage the remains to date them. So,
Yeah,
kind of a highlight point there because I know a lot of indigenous communities in the United States don't like DNA testing on remains because of that reason.
Yeah, which right there, that puts the ball in the court of the Tlahutka tribe. There's a descendant community of them out there, and they see this. What do you think?
Well, hopefully the government of Mexico actually cares. And on that terrible note, let's end it. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts on everything we said today. And we'll see you in the next video.